In this unit, we begin our study of the policy-making branches of our government. When we talk about policy-making institutions, we are talking about those institutions of our government that have been created by the Constitution in the first 3 articles of the Constitution and have the authority to make laws, rules, and regulations that are binding on the population. They are designed to represent the people of the country and the will of the people of the United States. So we will look at these policy-making institutions separately. And the first one we will begin with is the legislative branch, also known as Congress. The Congress was created in Article 1 of the Constitution, as we studied in the first unit. The framers of the Constitution thought Congress, the legislative branch, would be the most direct representative of the people and their will, and because of that, spent the most time organizing, structuring, creating rules for, and determining the powers of Congress, the legislative branch of our government. As you will learn in this chapter, Congress has both changed and stayed the same. In terms of its formal structure and procedures, it has varied little over the years. But in terms of its interpersonal dynamics and policy issues, it has changed significantly. The framers' original vision for the legislative branch was one whose powers were much narrower than those wielded by members of Congress today. Mainly, the framers wanted a government body that could make laws and raise and spend money as required to carry out the needs of the recently formed United States. Over time, and as the needs of the country evolved, the legislative branch has seen its powers and those of the other 2 branches, the executive and the judicial, evolve along with the changing demands of the day. Today, members of Congress must combine and balance the roles of lawmaker, budgeter, and policymaker while still representing those back home. So now let's take a look at the roots of the United States Congress. You already know some about this from the first unit, and you'll look at the structure of the Constitution in Article 1. As you might remember, Article 1 of the Constitution describes the structure of the legislative branch of government. The upper house of Congress is known as the Senate, and the lower house of Congress is known as the House of Representatives. Together, they form our bicameral legislature, known as Congress. In Congress, the number of members each state sends to the House of Representatives is determined by the population of the state. In contrast, each state has 2 members in the Senate, regardless of population. Let's explore the structure and rules for Congress in this first section. Members of the Senate serve 6-year terms, while members of the House of Representatives serve for 2 years. There are no term limits, so members may run for re-election for an unlimited number of terms. The advantages of incumbency make turnover in Congress very low. New members, such as Elise Stefanik, a Republican from New York, pictured here, is the youngest woman ever elected to the institution. But new members constitute only a small percentage of all of the representatives. This table includes the powers of Congress as spelled out in Article 1, Section 8. You may wish to pause the video here and refresh yourself with the enumerated or delegated powers as defined in Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution that we studied in Unit 1. Who can run for Congress? Representatives must be at least 25 years old and a citizen of the United States for at least 7 years. They must live in the district they want to represent, and they are elected to 2-year terms. The framers expected that the House members would be more responsible and accountable to the people, both because they were elected directly by the people and because they were up for re-election every 2 years. Senators, by contrast, are elected to 6-year terms, and every 2 years, 1/3 of them face re-election. So, for example, in the election coming up this November, we will be electing the entire House of Representatives, again, because they are elected every 2 years, but because senators' terms are only 6 years, Only 1/3 of those terms are up for re-election this year, so we will only be re-electing 1/3 of the Senate in this year's election. Now, you'll remember, originally, senators were selected by their state legislatures, but that changed with the passage of the 17th Amendment, passed in 1913. We, the voters, now directly vote for our state senators. The Constitution requires senators to be at least 30 years old and a citizen for at least 9 years, and also a resident of the state they represent. But there are only 3 formal qualifications in the Constitution to be a member of the House or to be a member of the Senate. That is age, citizenship of the United States, and residency in the state you represent. Other than that, all other qualifications to be a member of the House or Senate are informal and established by the people based on who we want to represent us. The Constitution specifically gives Congress its most important powers, the authority to make laws and raise and spend revenue. But the 2 houses must agree. No bill or proposed law can become law without the consent of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Constitution further gives Congress the authority to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. In the past, this necessary and proper clause, or sometimes called elastic clause, has been interpreted by the Supreme Court to mean that Congress can use this power along with its other powers to increase the scope of its authority, often at the expense of the states and not always in ways the framers may have intended. As you can see, this chart notes some of the key differences between the House of Representatives and the Senate, and you're expected to be familiar with these key differences. One of the big differences is the number of members each body has. The House has 435 members and the Senate 100. Again, you may wish to pause the video to review this table to understand the key differences between the House and Senate and the way they're organized, and to write them down in your notes. As you can see, this chart notes some of the key differences between the House of Representatives and the Senate as well, in terms of how they operate as different bodies, and changes that have taken place in the institution over time. These are important to understand because many times students think that the House of Representatives and the Senate are mirror images of each other, and that is absolutely not true. They are organized differently. Their members are accountable to different groups of people. They serve different terms in office. They have different rules in terms of how they operate and pass legislation. And there have been different changes in these bodies over time, not to mention that they have been given sometimes different powers in the Constitution. So the House and Senate operate very differently from each other. And to understand how our Congress functions and how laws get passed, it is very important to understand these key differences in the House and the Senate. What is it like to serve in Congress, and what kind of person would seek out this experience? In this section, we will find out. Most members of Congress today will tell you they enjoy their job, despite what can seem like near constant criticism of the institution. As a matter of fact, Congress has a popular approval rate now around 8%. So most Americans don't really approve of the job that Congress is doing. But most members of Congress still enjoy being in their jobs. According to one study, the average House member makes 40 trips a year to their home district. Days are long and filled with meetings, committee meetings, constituent meetings, and staff meetings. Incumbent House members, those currently in office and intending to stay in office, in particular, must always be thinking about their next election. If that election follows a census and a redistricting, staying in office can be that much harder. This table shows you what a day in the life of a typical congressional representative actually looks like. Put simply, Congress is better educated, more male, and whiter than the general population. More than two-thirds hold advanced degrees. Almost 250 members of Congress are millionaires, a fact which has led to the Senate at times being called the Millionaires Club. Many members have significant inherited wealth. In 2010, representatives had a median net worth of $75,000 each, and senators had a median net worth of $1.7 million. Most members of Congress may qualify for AARP benefits because they are older. The average age of House members is 57, while the average age of senators is 63. An influx of women, African Americans, and other minorities were elected in 1992. Some of those gains have held. The 112th Congress included 42 African Americans and more Latinos and women than other Congresses have. Of the thousands who run for office, those who have the best chance belong to either the Democratic or Republican Party. Election laws vary from state to state, and some states discriminate against independent party and minor party candidates. Raising money is crucial in an election, and incumbent members of Congress spend much of their free time on the phone or attending fundraisers. Incumbents have a tremendous advantage. On average, 96% of incumbents win their bid for primary and general election success. As a rule, challengers simply don't have the name recognition, access to free media, insight on fundraising, and advantageous district boundary lines so that they can win an election and defeat an incumbent. The number one thing to know about someone when they're running for Congress is, are they an incumbent or not? If they are, their chances of winning are significant. Shadow Senators Paul Strauss in the rear and Michael Brown to the left and Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, center, are all Democrats, and they represent Washington, D.C., in the Senate and the House, respectively. When Democrats held the House, Norton was allowed to cast votes in committee, a privilege she lost in 2011 when Republicans gained control of the House. D.C.'s two shadow senators have no voting rights or legal standing. Because the District of Columbia is not a state, their shadow senators are not allowed to cast votes. They can debate, but they can't vote. The sole representative to the House, Eleanor Holmes Norton, is not allowed to vote either. She can debate, but she can't vote, because the District of Columbia is not a state, and only representatives and senators from states are entitled to vote. As I said already, incumbents enjoy many tremendous advantages in running a campaign, which is why they enjoy such a high reelection rate. These include name recognition, claiming credit for bills passed, claiming credit for helping constituents, access to media, free mailing, called the franking privilege of district-related materials and newsletters, experience in running a campaign, and fundraising. Become familiar with all of these advantages of incumbency, because they have so many of them. It is so easy for incumbents to be reelected and so difficult for challengers to defeat an incumbent that is running for reelection. Congressional districts are redrawn every 10 years after a census is conducted. A census, or counting of the population, is required by the population every 10 years. And after that census is taken, congressional district boundary lines are redrawn to reflect increases or decreases in seats allotted to states, as well as shifts of the population within a state. Redistricting can be a very largely political process. In most states, it is up to the state legislature to redraw the district boundary lines. The new districts could be drawn to help incumbents win re-election, or to make it harder for incumbents if they are not a member of the party in power. When the practice of redistricting is so influenced by politics that it produces a district with a strange shape, it is called gerrymandering. Such cases are often challenged in court. In recent years, the Supreme Court has ruled that when redistricting the districts, they must be based on population and have relatively equal populations, and they must be contiguous, meaning the boundaries must be able to be drawn within a single line. It has also ruled that districts cannot be drawn to benefit one race or another. Now, you may be thinking, well, what is gerrymandering? Well, two drawings, one a mocking cartoon, the other all too real, show the bizarre geographical contortions that result from gerrymandering. The term was coined by combining the last name of the Massachusetts governor first credited with politicizing the redistricting process, Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, and the word salamander, which looked like the oddly shaped district that Gerry created. That was the original gerrymander. You can see here a recent gerrymander of a district in Texas, the 35th Congressional District of Texas, as of 2012. And when you see the shape of that district, you can see it has a very odd shape. And this is very familiar because district boundary lines are often drawn to benefit one political party or another and give them a majority of voters in a district so that that party can hold on to that district in re-election. The organization of both houses of Congress is closely tied to political parties and their strength in each chamber. Power is divided between the majority party and minority party. The majority party in each house is the party with the most members. As we will learn in this section, the party in charge has significant influence over how matters are handled in each chamber. The leadership structure in both chambers is similar, but there are distinct differences between the House and Senate. Congress is further organized into different layers of committees in which much of the work of Congress is done. This figure here, which you should pause and study, shows the organizational structure of the House and Senate. While there are a number of similarities, there are also, as you can see, significant key differences between the House and Senate are organized. In the House of Representatives, the Speaker of the House is the only officer of the House of Representatives specifically mentioned in the Constitution. The Speaker of the House presides over the House, oversees House business, is the official spokesperson for the House, and serves as second in the line of presidential succession should anything happen to both the President and the Vice President. The Speaker serves as a liaison to the Senate and shepherds party-backed bills through the legislative process. The entire House of Representatives elects a Speaker at the beginning of each Congress every 2 years, and traditionally, the Speaker is a member of the majority party. Speakers have leadership teams. The majority leader is the head of the party controlling the most seats in the House, and they also have party whips to help them do their jobs. You can read more about the jobs of each of these leaders in the reading assigned for this chapter. In the 114th Congress, the current Congress, Republicans hold a majority of seats in both the House of Representatives and the Senate. And you can see that as you pause and look at these maps here. Nancy Pelosi, shown here at a state dinner with President Barack Obama and General Colin Powell, was the first woman ever elected Speaker back in 2009 when the Democrats were the majority party in the House. She was a very strong Speaker. She was known for her ability to count votes before allowing any bill on the floor, resulting in the highest levels of party unity in modern Congresses and allowing a Democratic Congress and President Obama to pass the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, and to pass Wall Street regulation and reform after the financial crisis of 2008-09. She is still in Congress today, but because the Democrats are the minority party, she is no longer the Speaker of the House. She serves as Minority Leader, which is the highest ranking position of leadership for the minority party Democrats. The Constitution specifies that the Vice President of the United States presides over the Senate and is therefore President of the Senate. But because the Vice President is not a member of the Senate, the Vice President most of the time is not allowed to vote. The only time the Vice President may cast a vote is to break a tie vote in the Senate. The official chair of the Senate is called the President pro tempore, or pro tem, or temporary president for short. He or she is selected by the majority party and presides over the Senate in the absence of the Vice President. Because presiding over the Senate can be a routine, tedious, and boring duty, more junior members of the majority party actually tend to take over this activity on a rotating basis. The true leader of the Senate is the majority leader, who is selected by the majority party. That is currently Mitch McConnell, a Republican from Kentucky. The majority leader works to make sure that party members vote for party bills. The minority leader, currently Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, and the Republican and Democratic whips round out the leadership team in positions in the Senate and perform functions similar to those of their counterparts in the House of Representatives. You should become familiar with the roles and jobs of each of these people with the reading that you do in this chapter. Much of the work that Congress does is handled in committee. Standing committees are the first and last place to which most bills go for consideration. They are called standing committees because they are permanent and continue from one Congress to the next, and they are also the only committees that can actually pass bills. Joint committees are standing committees that include members from both the House and Senate. They cannot pass bills, but they do conduct investigations, special studies, and focus on major issues such as the economy or a specific scandal. Conference committees are special joint committees that work out the differences in bills passed by both the House and Senate. Both chambers have to pass the exact same bill before it can become law. Select or special committees are temporary committees set up for a specific purpose, such as to investigate the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks or other scandals that might occur. Historically, committee chairs are long-serving members of the majority party, though that is not always the case. Sometimes more junior members are selected to serve as chair of the committee, but they are always members of the majority party, and they typically have been serving long. This is why we often say the seniority rule determines committee chairmanship. The committee chairperson is a very powerful person on each committee. Look closely at this slide to see the committees and subcommittees of the 113th Congress. This ends part one of our look at Congress. The second half of our look at Congress will be covered in part two of the video for Congress.